It's 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and we're going to talk about all of the books that I've read this year. Promise I'm not usually drinking this early. This was just the only time that I could film this video. I really had my heart set on drinking my way through my 2023 read list. So, first, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge my new setup. My partner built my bookshelf. I'm very grateful. Although it has brought to my attention, and probably yours, that I don't actually own a lot of books. The library is my bestie and I love it. So things are looking, I'm gonna fill this out. It's been like 2 days. Bear with me. So welcome to my 2023 recap. So we have a few drinking rules to establish. First, I'm gonna take a drink whenever we encounter a book that I hate. Secondly, I'm gonna take a drink whenever I encounter a book that I completely forget the plot of if I have to look it up. And number three, I'm going to take a drink anytime I read anything that isn't a horror book, because that's special for me. So I have all of the covers saved on my computer, and we're just going to go through them randomly. This is in no particular order, not necessarily the order that I read them in. Let's go through what I read and talk about it. All right, we got a double feature right off the bat. One drink because I hate it. Okay, this was like a 2-star for me. I didn't like hate it. We'll get into some books that I hated. But it wasn't good. And 2, because it's not a horror. So usually I love Anthony Horowitz. I really loved House of Silk and Moriarty. They were excellent. Other stuff of his, even Magpie Murders, I really enjoyed. This particular series, where Anthony Horowitz is basically writing himself as Watson as he follows around this asshole detective, doesn't do it for me. And I think I forgot that it doesn't do it for me. I read The Word is Murder, mentioned on the cover, and I didn't like it. And then I saw this, and I was like, oh, I love Anthony Horowitz. Let me read his mystery novel. No. I can get behind an asshole detective. I can. But the murder mystery is just not terribly compelling. And it isn't powerful enough to drag me through the annoying relationship that these two have. Because the guy's an asshole for no other reason than to be an asshole, which is not a good reason to be an asshole. Like, it makes sense if you're like, this is my job, I'm doing it, I'm bulldozing anyone who gets in my way because this is a fucking murder investigation. That makes sense to me. But most of the relationship conflicts between the writer and the detective could be solved if they just like talk to each other. And I hate when that happens in romance novels because that's not really a good conflict if all that would solve it would be like one honest conversation. And I get that people aren't honest with themselves and with each other and that like relationships are complicated, but fuck. It's just not very interesting to watch two people just dance around each other and get constantly annoyed by each other. And then the writer just keeps getting stepped on and like doesn't seem to have the agency to stand up for himself. Like he's always like, oh, this is the last time he treats me like shit, and then immediately just forgets about it when there's a new development in the case. Which just, I'm not a fan, man. So I think this was my bad for picking it up, not remembering that I didn't like the other entries in the series. But like, I should like it. I should like it. It's about a bunch of writers on this like writing festival on this little island, this remote little island. It sounds lovely. Someone gets murdered. It should be my cup of tea, and it's just not. But you should read House of Silk though, instead of this thing. Read House of Silk. This might not technically count as a book, but I'm counting it. It's a fully voice acted, more like a radio play situation than an audiobook, which like if you haven't listened to a radio play, I forgot how good these are. It's just fun to have everything voice acted and then like sound effects in the background. Like it's fun. It's nice. But this was in like the library and I did read it, listen to it like a book, so we're counting it. This is Darkly Dreaming. It is a fantasy novelette. I wouldn't even say novella, like baby novel. Um, about a woman, a poet, who goes to a ball in an attempt to find a patron so that she can rejoin society after being exiled for starting a riot. This is set in the Warhammer universe, which not usually my thing. Um, I did this as like a project for my partner. I read a bunch of Warhammer books. You'll see other ones of that. Um, just like it's a fun little thing. Um, this was okay. I mean, everyone likes a good masquerade ball. Like it's just good. They did have a bunch of points where they were just talking about, well, what is truth? If truth is a flame, is it the spark or is it the ash? And like all of this bullshit. Um, so aside from that, really good atmosphere. The characters were well developed-ish. Like the poet was like classic, I'm a strong woman and I'm mad. And like that being a poet and being mad were her only qualities, which look, I can get behind. I can. But it would have been nice to have her have a little bit more depth. But otherwise, like it was a totally fine time. If you're actually into the Warhammer universe, which like I don't think you are, then like it's worth a shot, but it's probably a pass for most people. So this is a graphic novel that I forced my library to buy for me. If you don't know that you can do that, you can ask your library to buy you stuff if they don't have it in stock. It takes a bit, but like worth it. So this is a graphic novel about a socialite who goes to this fabulous party and she's meant to be sacrificed as part of this cult ritual. But because she's off fucking someone in a corner somewhere, she doesn't actually get sacrificed during that party. And then as a result, starts seeing all of this stuff. As you can see in the picture, it's creepy eyes everywhere. It's great. The art is really beautiful. The story didn't capture me. Like, it sounds like a good premise, right? The execution just kind of fell flat. It was, I don't know, the socialite character was just not really relatable for me. I was a bit bummed by this. The writing was just not as good as the art, so pass. Dead Space. I don't remember. Look, I remember that I liked it. I remember that this is good. I don't remember what it's about. Let's Google. Hold on for a second. Oh yeah. Okay. I remember. Yeah, this was good. Okay, I'm just gonna read you the synopsis since I have it out. An investigator must solve a brutal murder on a claustrophobic space station in this tense science fiction thriller from the author of Salvation Day. Okay, so this is about a girl named Hester who's on this small spaceship, and like, not to spoil anything, but it has to do with AI and just like company politics in a way that's, as someone who used to work in an office, is very relatable. Um, what I really liked about it was the way that they had AI set up as like, it's this monstrous AI, monstrous in size, not necessarily like what it does. It's not just like a straight up the AI is trying to kill you book. That's not it. What I liked about it was that this AI was so big, and then they had to have this specialized person to kind of like bond with it and like be its caretaker and trainer, and like that kind of relationship was really interesting. To think that there's like having that human connection, like cultivating this like growing being, was really interesting. And yeah, it has murder in it, and I liked it, even though apparently it's not super memorable. Okay, this was another Warhammer book. Um, it's the start of a vampire-based series where a woman who's been a vampire for 600 years plays herself in a historical retelling in like a Shakespearean stage, um, of like how she defeated this vampire. And the vampire comes back during this play to like ruin everything. Is it like peak literature? No. Was it fun? Yes. I think it's just fun to watch people putting on a play, like the behind the scenes of it, and just all of the ridiculous actor shenanigans. And there's vampires, and who doesn't like a vampire? And there's a murder in the middle of it. Like, it is a Warhammer book, but like not knowing jack shit about Warhammer, I didn't miss out on anything. It doesn't feel very Warhammery to me. It's just it was a good time. I listened to this on audiobook, and I will probably listen to at least the next one in the I think it's a trilogy. There's at least 3 books in this series, and it's kind of the thing that I'll like put on in the background while I'm working on something else, because you don't have to take your whole brain to it, but it's fun. So yeah, it was fine. Oh God. Okay, if you haven't watched my entire rant video on this, go watch that. This is one of the worst books I've ever read. The racism and the sexism is just truly incredible. So this book was a prequel to a Stephen King cult classic miniseries called Rose Red. It terrified the shit out of me when I was a kid, so I have like a soft spot for that. But this book that was essentially just like marketing for it was not written by Stephen King, even though Stephen King wrote the miniseries. And yeah, they should have just gotten Stephen King to write it, because this is unmentionably awful. But yeah, I'll link the video in the description so you can go watch that and not read this book, because no one should. Eight Perfect Murders was a book recommended to me by my grandma, and I read it basically in one sitting when I was on a 5-hour flight. Oh, I get to drink because it's not a horror. Oh. So the premise of this book is a murderer starts murdering people based on perfect murders in like Agatha Christie books. Not all Agatha Christie, but like in books like Agatha Christie that he was recommended by this bookseller. This bookseller remembers giving this guy a list of perfect murders and thought that the request was a little strange, and then realizes the connection between the list that he gave him and a couple of the murders, and has to go in and solve the murders with a cop. This was really good. I didn't love the ending necessarily, but it's absolutely worth a read if you're into mysteries like this, especially if you read a lot of mysteries and would get like the perfect murder references. It's worth it. I didn't get all of the references, but they do recommend that like if you wanted to read any of the books that they're going to talk about, that like they're going to spoil all of them. So yeah, but if you're into perfect murders or just like old murder mysteries in general, would recommend. This is great. 2 drinks for this one because I hated it and it's not a horror. So I was really hyped for this book. I loved The House by the Cerulean Sea, which I read earlier this year, in like January. We'll get to it. So I was really excited for this because I was like, oh, that was like shockingly heartwarming. And usually I don't enjoy heartwarming. Usually that's not my vibe, but I really liked it. It was whimsical in a way that like a lot of adult books aren't. And I kind of missed that in adult fiction. This, I just, look, maybe it's my bad for picking up a novel about robots learning how to be human, because that's just not my jam. Pinocchio is not my thing. I don't care. But I really wanted to like this, and I thought because this guy wrote it that it would be good, and I just didn't vibe with this at all. So, not my thing. If you are like, Pinocchio is one of my favorite Disney movies, then absolutely you will like this. Okay, so I am a T. Kingfisher slut. I'm a slut for all of her books. I don't love every single one of them, but I really enjoy her horror. I think she does it really well. Even some of her fairy tale retellings Love those. House with Good Bones, I actually comped on my query. Um, I loved it enough that I compared my own book to it when trying to sell it to other people. So this is absolutely one of my favorite books this year. It's about a woman who goes home to her childhood home, and there's a weird thing with ladybugs, and the vultures circle around the house. And if you like horror and if you like haunted houses, you should read this book. It's good. It's not as scary as some of her others. Um, the Twisted Ones was definitely her scariest book, I think. So if you're looking for like a real raw kind of, if you're looking for a real like scary ghost story, I would recommend the Twisted Ones. If you like haunted houses specifically, I would go with this. It's really good. I would highly recommend this. 5 stars. Look, we're including every single book that I read this year, so all of my plants died. But I don't blame this book. That's just on me. I'm gonna drink anyway. Do you think this does this count as horror? I will count it as horror because it's horror adjacent. I think it was certainly horrifying. I'm gonna drink because I didn't like this one either. I'm not a hater. I do read books that I love, mostly. The first 50% of this book, loved it. All of the great dark academia vibes. I was a theater minor in university and was bullied out of the program. So kind of revisiting that, and some of these characters were familiar to me because of that experience. And I did enjoy seeing them suffer a little bit because of that. Um, so if you're a theater kid, you might really like this. And I think there's a lot to like about this book. But the last 50% just dragged. It was just like things were happening and then things stopped happening completely. And it just dragged. And it's really disappointing because I think Rio is a talented writer and I don't know what happened to the last 50% of that book. I want more of the first bit, and I think it was just purely a 1 star because I was so disappointed because I know that they can do better. Okay, I can explain myself. I was playing one of those video games that's just like you have something on in the background and you grind the hell out of it. And this was what I was listening to when I was grinding because I just didn't have anything else. And I was like, oh, Five Nights at Freddy's. Sure. This was fine. If you like kind of like trashy pulp horror, this is probably for you. Apparently there's like lots of these kinds of books, which I didn't realize. There's like lots of like essentially like fan fiction anthologies about this. Solid 3 stars. Okay, this was a really short book by Neil Gaiman. The art was really beautiful. It was kind of a reversal of Gothic tropes. It was about essentially a woman coming to this haunted house in the middle of the night with this creepy man in it, and this house has a creepy secret. And then there's a kind of a twist, and I won't spoil it, but if you can get your hands on it, and if you like Neil Gaiman, this is good. It's just like a little snack. Good. 2 drinks for this one. Okay, so I got into crocheting last year. I'm not very good at it, but I saw this in a used bookstore. My partner, when we go to used bookstores, it takes fucking forever. He has to browse through every single book in the fantasy section, and I get bored. So I started reading this in the used bookstore, picked it up from the library later to like finish it. Because I like crocheting and like cozy little murder mystery. Num num. Delightful. The amount of like diet culture in this book about people getting murdered over crochet was like, what? All of these middle-aged women were like following this book guru. It's like a side plot that they're following this book guru, and instead of eating chips or like chocolate or anything that tastes good, they just crochet until the temptation goes away. And that's like the diet secret. And What the fuck, man? I mean, like, I didn't expect this to be good. I expected this to be passable. There was also just like some weird hatred. Like the main character is dating this cop, and the cop's coworker, who's like in her 30s and blonde and fit, has a thing for this 50-year-old man for some reason, and is getting really jealous over the main character. And there's all of this like there's this weird like internalized misogyny about it of like, yeah, she's so young and I'm so jealous that she's so young, but I can cook proper meals and that's what he loves about me. And like there was just like a lot of unnecessary, like that subplot did not need to happen. It made me feel weird. I no. No, no, no. Another T Kingfisher because I'm a slut. This is about a girl who's in this magical kingdom, and all of the magical people have been arrested. But she's been able to keep her magic a secret because the only thing that her magic is good for is baking. And she figures out how to use her baking skill to help defend the town from an invasion. It's really cute. I listened to this on audiobook when I was doing something else, and it was a really delightful story. So this is maybe a deep cut for some people. I couldn't even find the cover. Like the Goodreads entry for this book didn't even have a cover on it. But John Dixon Carr is one of my favorite murder mystery writers. The murder mysteries are often locked rooms and they can be a bit convoluted, but he does atmosphere so fucking well. I discovered his books when I was in university, and I reread this one book like 3 or 4 times. It was about this secret masquerade ball that was happening in the back of a waxwork museum. Like it was like a secret entrance and you had to go in with your beautiful gown, and it was like 1920s Paris, and it was fucking amazing. Even if you don't like murder mysteries, just the atmosphere of being in a club in 1930s-ish Paris with all of these socialites, and like everybody's getting drunk and doing cocaine and everybody's dressed beautifully, and like there's all of this like intellectual discourse about literature, and like I just want to be there, just like drinking some good wine and like listening to a bunch of pompous assholes talk about murdering each other. Like I don't remember who did it. I don't even care. I will definitely be reading more of him. In 2024, I think it's a goal to read more of these because I think I forgot how much I like this. Okay. Oh, and I have to drink for the last one because it wasn't a murder, or it wasn't a horror. Okay. This is supposed to be like a kinky BDSM fantasy classic. Like this is canonically revered, or at least as far as I can find. People really like this book, or did in the 90s. This book is 900 pages. It is a chunker. It took me a good year, maybe like 9 months to read this. This is about a woman who, from a very young age, is taken into the night court to train to be a prostitute, essentially. In this world, being a prostitute is not a bad thing. She's actually a very well-paid escort, partially because she has a very special ability. She has Kushiel's dart. She was born with this. It's like a little red mark in her eye. And what it means is that she gets off on pain. She really fucking loves pain. She's a slut for pain. Hardcore masochist in here. And that makes her really special and really sought after in this world of like courtiers who want to pay untold amounts of money to fuck her, which is great for her. I think there's a lot to be said about the portrayal of sex work in this book. On the one hand, sex is very, especially Phaedra's, that's the main character, Phaedra's overall opinion on sex of like, the sex work doesn't bother her, and like she feels like it's very free flowing, and like it's good to give love and receive love, and like sex is a divine act, and like that part is very sex positive and healthy. there's like, I don't know, like a lot of it is like because she's getting pleasure out of these encounters, she doesn't mind being a sex worker. And I think that's not, being a sex worker is not kind of like that binary of like either I hate it and I'm being tortured and like I don't want to do this and nobody would ever do this by choice, and like this is beautiful and free and I love every single encounter that I'm having. Like it's somewhere in the middle, I think, for most people, having not, you know. So like that was a little squiggy. What I really have a problem with, I have two big problems with this book. One is the world building is the laziest fucking world building I've ever fucking read. All she does is rename European countries. And then all of the people in those renamed countries are just racial stereotypes. Which, not so bad for like Fedra, who is French in Terre d'Ange. It's France. It's fantasy France. And everyone there is exotically beautiful and all about hedonism, and they love the art. And then she gets kidnapped by Vikings, and they're stereotypically like barbarian Vikings. And then she like finds her way to Ireland, and they're stereotypically Irish. And I was reading this in bed and I had to stop and read. There's a part where they meet Jewish people. She doesn't call them Jewish, but it's very clearly like a Jewish stereotype. And I was reading this to my Jewish partner, and it was just like, it's not like she was saying anything bad. It's just not good world building. She just use these stereotypes and then like apply them to an entire race of people and rename it and call it, this is my world. Terre d'Ange is totally different. The Eschites are totally not Jewish. Like, look, if you're gonna be that lazy with it, just keep calling it France and just like, or like whatever the 1400s equivalent of France was, and just like make it an alternate universe. Like don't pretend it's something else when it's clearly just a renamed thing. Like, also, I'm getting very heated about this. I have been wanting to tell you about this novel for months now. It's finally all coming out. I'm so excited. One of the most fun parts of writing a fantasy world is doing the world building. That's like, some people only do the world building and don't bother writing the novel. Like that's the good shit. That's the like, that's where you actually want to do. It's the best part. And the fact that she just didn't do that part. It's the best part. Come on. Fuck. Okay. The other thing that I had a problem with in this novel was that it is bogged down by all of these intricate court politics that we don't need to know. A lot of the like, it's very Dickensian in the way that like it starts with her being born and like follows every step after that, when we could easily have lost the first like 150 pages and gone straight into like, oh, she's been adopted by this guy who's going to train her to do this thing. Like, could absolutely have started there, missed absolutely nothing. But a lot of this is like court politics. So like she'll go through paragraphs and paragraphs where she's just naming names, doing things to other names. And like court politics does come into play in this book later on, but it's very straightforward. Like you have to remember like 3 or 4 names in order to keep things straight. And there's just paragraphs and paragraphs of all of these people that we don't give a shit about and never couldn't be expected to remember. First of all, if she mentions them on page 45 and then we're having them in page 831, never mentioning them between the points. But like, I just don't care. That's not good world building. Just like info dumping a bunch of people that have no bearing on the plot. That's not, I don't give a shit. Maybe it comes up more in the second and third books. I have the books right here. I'm hoping they get good. And I'm sure some of you are wondering, hey, why did you read all 912 pages if you hated it? Like, you could just put a book down. It's possible to just put a book down, and I realized that. But after I started skipping through once I recognized that I didn't actually need to know all of the court drama and started skipping through the bullshit, it's actually like quite a quick read, and I was really kind of I did start to enjoy it by the end. I did. I will give it that. It was just like a quick read. I could blast through like 25 pages a night. I didn't really have to focus on it because like there wasn't anything, it's not a George R. R. Martin book. I don't have to really like pay attention to all the idiosyncrasies. So, it was good for that, and for that reason, I will probably at least try to read book 2. But I should be spending my time reading a better book than this. Also, if you're gonna market yourself as like this hardcore BDSM book, you'd better be good at writing a sex scene, dude. These sex scenes are incredibly tame. Like, oftentimes they fade to black. Most of the time, it's just talking about her pain and not really like going through like the ebb and flow of sex, or like the pleasure part of it. Is just like she's getting whipped and she really likes it, and like, sure, fine, but like, this isn't 50 Shades of Grey where people are gonna get off on it. I was expecting more porn in this book, and I was disappointed that there was so little actual porn. I was expecting like hardcore BDSM porn, and that didn't deliver. And I'm sure you will have recommendations for me in the comments, please. Okay, we're moving on. Okay, this book is one of my top this year. Absolutely, like top 3, easily. This is about a doctor in a small fantasy town. The town feels very like Town on the Moors, or like Old Flemish, sort of like dreary mining town vibes. And this doctor has to discover what's going on with this plague that suddenly beset this not royal but like noble family. It's good. It's weird, but it's good. There is a lot of body horror in this, and most of the Goodreads reviews that were rating it negatively were like, I couldn't deal with the body horror. So like, if that's not your thing, don't read this. If you can't handle like some of the guts stuff, it's not grotesque, I would say. I wouldn't say that it's like over the top gore, but like, it's largely medical. There's like medical stuff going on. There's going to be some like dissection. If you're not into that, don't read this. And I'm trying to give you as much information as possible without spoiling anything, because like, there are some good twists and turns in here. If you're into fantasy, if you're into scary monsters, if you're into like alien type things, if you're into monsters that possess you, if you're into any of that stuff, this is good. Read this. It's really good. You know what this means. Okay, so this was my first year living with a partner. There's some ebbs and flows. As someone who lived by themselves for almost a decade, it's been an adjustment. So we read this, hoping to like get some strategies to help with some of the like the bumps, the adjustment period. I think the core concept of this can work for some people, and I like a lot of what she said. This was definitely meant for like parents who are having a hard time. So like, as someone who doesn't have kids, it didn't feel like a lot of it applied to me. But also just, this felt so patronizing to men. Like, it was really just like, yes, you should, have fair and equitable division of labor, and that means that like men have to do chores, but like, also most women feel that they're fully supported if their man just does 20% of the work. That was legitimately a thing where she was like, you don't have to get to 50%. Most women feel like they're supported by their partners. And like, it's never like a lesbian couple that she's talking about. It's always you know, like the man can't be expected to do, or like you're never going to get him to do 50% of the work. So maybe try getting him to 20% and you'll find that it's actually like, fuck off. Fuck off. Both partners should do an equal amount of work as much as is possible. I'm not saying that a 50-50 split perfectly every time is going to happen, but like 20%, he works full time and he does 20% of the work. You work full time and you do the other 80%. And I'm not saying that she doesn't have any good points in this book. I'm just saying that, like, the bar's in hell. The bar's in hell. Okay. I'm gonna take a drink for this one because I barely remember it. I know that there's like a voice in the telephone and it's very 80s, and I think they burn the house down at the end. I remember this was very mediocre. Would not recommend. For nostalgia purposes, of course. I tried to read one that I didn't remember what the ending was. Definitely went through a phase in like my early teens where I read all of them. It's good happy ending shit. Comforting. I think this was about a serial killer during the time of Jack the Ripper in London who wasn't Jack the Ripper, and they were having a hard time, the detectives were having a hard time like parsing the two. And I think there was like someone having visions. This I don't really remember it, and I don't think it was particularly good. In the House in the Dark of the Woods is a novella um, that feels like reading an old fairy tale. A lot of people said it was pretentious bullshit in Goodreads reviews when I was reviewing it, and like I do get where they were coming from. This guy is a literature professor. It is a bit pretentious, and like a lot of people were like, I don't know what's going on. It wasn't clear. I, on the other hand, actually really like this. It did feel like an old, like pre-Grimm, where like everybody dies at the end kind of fairy tale, and like no spoilers. I'm not saying everybody dies at the end. And it was like you did have to be paying attention and like thinking about the book to like track what was happening and like see where the story was going and like get some of the symbolism. And like I'm usually not into books that are obtuse for being obtuse sake. Just tell me the damn story. If the damn story is good, I don't care how you write it. If all you're doing is like supporting your themes, then I don't want to listen to a sermon. Like I get why people don't like this, but I really liked it. I thought it was good and like a little bit challenging, and in a way that was stimulating rather than frustrating. I liked the prose. I liked just the overall atmosphere of this woman taking off her shoes and going into the woods, and she finds this cabin and it's beautiful, and there's this beautiful lake and there's a sumptuous table, and this woman is like, you can stay with me, and like all of those things. And there's, you know, beware of the other women in the woods, and like this girl called Hope comes to her, and like I really like the atmosphere of this. It's a quick read. If you think that might be your vibe, check this one out. I read a bunch of Junji Ito. Apologies if I'm mangling that pronunciation. I read a collection of short stories, and then I read this book, which was like the first full length thing. I really want to like him. I do. I think just like body horror is not my thing. In Leech, it was great, but it wasn't like the focus. In the way that like Junji Ito, I think, is incredibly creative and really fresh. The ideas do feel really fresh, but it's just not for me. So if you're into that kind of stuff, or you haven't read anything of his and are a big horror fan, I would still recommend picking something by him up. But it's not my thing, personally. Okay, so I read this for another reading vlog that you probably didn't watch based on the numbers. It's fine. I'm not mad at you. I'm just disappointed. It's a drink for my pride, by the way. I really fucking love this. I know a lot of people don't like Kirsten White. I remember a lot of people hating on Hyde, her previous book, which was about this monster in an amusement park. I loved that book. I read it in one sitting. People hated the dialogue, and I didn't get it. Mr. Magic is about a kids' TV show that everyone remembers, but there's no tapes of it. Nobody can find anything online, anything about it. Any speculation gets immediately taken down. And this girl who was on it gets invited to this reunion of like all her fellow castmates to go and talk about the show so that people can remember what it was because there's no media of it online. It's really fucking good. I really enjoyed this. I thought it did the whole creepy kids TV show trope very well. I liked most of the characters. I thought they were very well developed. It wasn't perfect, but yeah, I would absolutely recommend reading this. This was one of my top 5 for sure. Okay, so this I stumbled on when I was at an independent bookstore in Portland. It has like very like vacation vibes for me. This is cute. I found it got a little pedantic at the end. The ending was very much like the publishing process is soul crushing and like you probably won't get published and like here's all the ways it's going to crush your spirit, which was like, I mean, true, but especially since this was a book about writing a novel geared towards beginners, I didn't think that that was necessary. I think it's important to like manage people's expectations, but especially since most people who start writing a novel are not going to even get to that point. I don't think it's helpful, you know, and she wasn't really giving advice on how to navigate it. She was just like, bake pie, because this is gonna suck. And also your dreams are gonna die. Like, oh, okay. It did inspire me to bake pie. It wasn't a good pie, but I did bake it. I hated this book. Also, it's not a horror. 2 drinks for me. It has been an hour and I am starting to feel it. Okay, I'm so sorry editing me. This is gonna be a nightmare. Okay, Scorched Grace is about a badass nun who solves a murder that happens at her convent. She teaches that the convent is also a school, and like the murder happens at the school, which is also the convent. Anyway, I was on board for a badass chain smoking alcoholic nun. Like, sure, aren't we all? But it was very much like, I'm gonna tell you again and again that I'm badass and that this is like a weird thing for me to be doing because I'm a badass chain smoking lesbian. Did I mention I'm a badass chain smoking lesbian? Oh, I've caused so much pain in my life, so I had to atone, and that's why I became a nun. I'm not going to tell you about it. It's too dark. I couldn't possibly. Did I mention I'm a badass chain smoking nun? Like, show, don't tell, babe. It just wasn't very interesting. Nothing really happened. I mean, I guess the murder happened, but I wanted more out of this. Like, I was on board for the concept, and then the execution just felt very hooked on this shock value of her being a badass chain smoking lesbian nun without showing me as much of her being a badass chain smoking lesbian nun. Cool concept. Wouldn't recommend. Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit before, but The House in the Cerulean Sea is really good. I don't like heartwarming stories. I don't like romances. It's not usually my thing, but like the whimsy of this and the way that the characters were written just really made it all come together for me. It was a delight. I would highly recommend this book, even though In the Lives of Puppets didn't really do me any favors. But you already know about this book. Everyone's recommended this book. It's you get it. Okay, so The Monster of Ellenhaven was kind of a Frankenstein retelling. In this fantasy city, if you throw someone out into the ocean, they come back wrong. And it's about like this Frankenstein monster pairing up with someone else that I don't remember. Take a drink for that one. This monster pairing up with someone else to kind of get to the bottom of some of these mystery murder things that are happening in Ellenhaven. I listened to this on audiobook. It was fine. It was a solid 4 stars for me. I think I mentioned this in the Halloween vlog that I was doing. But yeah, if you're into Frankenstein and really like those kinds of tropes, this is a good book for you. I'm kind of meh on Frankenstein. I'm more of a vampires and werewolves girl. But if you're into Frankenstein, this is good. It's come to my attention that we may have canceled Jim Butcher. Like, the way that he writes women is not, like, inherently bad, like, but it's just flat and doesn't really give them any personality other than the fact that he wants to fuck them. This was fine. This was never meant to be like high literature. It was a little bit stupid, but it's meant to be a little bit stupid. Am I going to read the rest of the Dresden Files? Probably not. Am I glad that I read this one? Yes. This is more of a fantasy romance by T. Kingfisher. I really liked the concept of it, of like a paladin who's lost his god and this perfume maker who has this like beautiful perfume studio with like all of these strange concoctions like coming together to make a perfume for the king. The perfumer is commissioned to make a perfume for the king, and there's all of this like court intrigue and stuff, and it gets her into trouble, and the paladin has to be like her bodyguard. And if you're into romance, you will probably like this. I found it a little flat. I'm not into romance as a rule, so the fact that it was so heavy on the romance, other fantasies that I've read by T. Kingfisher have been like fantasy with a little bit of romance at the end. And this was romantasy, a little bit of fantasy at the end. Like, so I think that was, my expectations had set me up for failure there. But if that sounds like a good premise to you and you're really into the romance, do it. I did find that it had a little bit of the like, if only they would talk to each other, then it would be fine. So like, it did feel like it dragged on in parts. And also, the perfumer was such a passive character and was such like a, this is going to sound wrong when I say it. She was just such a victim without any agency or self-confidence that it was hard to root for her, because it was just like she wouldn't do anything for herself. And I get that people are in those kinds of spaces, but it's just, it doesn't make for a good narrative when the characters don't do anything, you know? I'm not trying to like victim blame or anything in real life. It's just in fiction, when you have a character that is so passive, it is really hard to root for them. The main character just wasn't for me. Not a romance, not my thing. Didn't hate it. You might like it. Okay, so this was given to me by my mom, who thought I might like it. I didn't hate it. I think my main problem was this book was just like, I hate the monarchy. And it was weird to read this book through that lens of like, there's just so many servants there to like wait on her every need. And like, I don't know. I'm very anti-monarchy. So like, a lot of this was like a glimpse into Queen Victoria's life and like daily habits. And that felt very jarring to me. The like actual zombie demon hunter part was funny and stupid. If you're into like the Pride and Prejudice and zombies genre of fiction, you might like this. Like, it's fun to just have this stupid book on my shelf. I think like the cover is just amazing. Would I recommend reading it? Actually, no. No, I wouldn't. The Luminous Dead was something I didn't really expect to love, and I fucking loved it. It's about a caver, like an interspace caver, who is going in to explore this cave with the help of her boss. In this world, going into these caves is really dangerous because there's these monsters who can smell or sense you. Nobody's really sure how the monsters find you, but it's clear that you have to wear this suit that's very highly technical. You can't get out of it. You can't like open your helmet. And they have a team of people on the surface who are like constantly monitoring and like helping you and like doing all these checks and stuff, and it's very like you don't have agency of your own body and you're in this really dangerous, difficult cave system, which is horrifying on its own, and then it takes a bunch of twists. I do find it did get a little slow at the like 75% mark, but I do think, given the fact that the main character is stuck in this cave by herself, other than having another character on an intercom, that like they did the best they could. There's this trope in fiction where people have a secret and it takes you until the very end of the book as they like slowly give you like little hints, and it feels like the plot isn't moving forward because you never actually get to the secret until the very end, but it's like setting it up in like page 2 that, oh, there's this terrible secret. And instead of doing that, we find out the secret more early on, and then that secret has an effect on the rest of the story and like helps move the story forward, which I thought was just good writing. I really liked that, and I would read other things by Caitlin Starring. So if you like Tremors, or you're just terrified of caves in general, I would highly recommend this. This is creepy good fun. I read this for my trying to solve an Agatha Christie murder video. If you haven't seen it, I will also link that down below. This wasn't like top tier Christie for me. This was mid tier, mostly because I don't think I could have reasonably solved it by the end. But it's an Agatha Christie, and Agatha Christie is usually a good time. So not my top pick, but if you haven't read this and you've read a bunch of her other stuff, go for it. It's very New Year's Eve themed, so if you have the chance to get that before New Year's Eve, I want something that's specifically that holiday themed, this is a good pick. So I've read a bunch of other Samantha Irby stuff. I remember really liking her first book when I was in my 20s. This, I just didn't get. And she's clearly a very funny lady. I think just, she talks a lot about being in her middle age and just like the settled suburban life that she has, and that's not where I am in my life. So I think there was just like a mismatch of that compared to when I was reading the stories about her being broke and chronically ill in her 20s. That was very relatable. And I think it was just funnier. Being a suburban housewife with a nice, perfectly nice life is just less funny. I think it's just less funny, and this book is just not as good, but it's also probably the fact that I'm not a middle-aged woman in the suburbs with stepchildren that probably also has something to do with it. So if you haven't read anything by her, I would recommend her first book. I would not necessarily recommend this one. Okay, so I read this book at the same time that I read The Only One Left. Both are Gothic novels about a woman going to this strange Gothic manor house on this island, and the townspeople all have a secret, and like, it was very much, I was reading the same book. One of them set in the 1800s, one of them set in 2020. And I think probably that made me enjoy them both a little bit less. This was about a woman who gets called to be a nanny for this girl who's recently lost her brother in this old manor house in this island on the English coast. It was fine. It sounds like it should be good, and I had higher hopes for it, but the execution was just not as creepy and not as twisty as I wanted it to be. Okay, so I've been meaning to read something by Tanana Reebdu for a while now. She's a horror powerhouse. I've seen her on Dragula so many times now. This wasn't a 5-star for me, but it was good and something a little bit different. It was essentially a haunted house story about a family who finds themselves cursed and has to get rid of that curse so that they can undo some of the bad things that have happened. There was this weird fixation on teenage sex, not just like in the teenagers in the book having sex, but like this woman goes back to her hometown and kind of like falls in love again with her like old high school flame. And like, I just don't believe that anyone had the best sex of their lives when they were 16 and nobody knew what the fuck they were doing. I just don't believe that. What? This is a big chonker of a book. I'm kind of glad that I read it over audiobook just because I think it would have taken me like probably twice as long to read it physically. I do think the book could have been shorter, but I always think books could be shorter. If you haven't read anything by her, I think this is a perfectly fine starting point. I do think that there were a lot of fresh ideas that she brought to the haunted house trope. So if you like haunted houses, but you're kind of sick of reading the same thing, this might be a good try. Mm. This isn't a horror, and I hated it. So I tried reading this when I was 16, and I remember owning like the first two volumes. Um, and for some reason, I thought I would like go and revisit it and see if I still liked it. I don't. Okay, so it's about a traffic cop who gets pulled from traffic cop duty to go work with this basement dwelling agoraphobe who's an asshole to everyone but has impossible hacking skills and is like the most brilliant person ever. And they can't get anyone to work with him because he's such an asshole. But she goes to work with him because they've run out of detectives and they actually make a good team. And on the surface, I'm down for that. It would make a great cop show. The way that they show the female main character, she's always in impossible miniskirts and heels, so we can always see her panties, and we're always staring down her shirt, and it's just gratuitous panty shots constantly. And the female main character is just not very well developed at all. Nobody is very well developed at all. Writing is bad and misogynistic, and I don't know why I could tolerate that at 16. No. Do not read this. Do not. No. This book fucking sucked. Fucking sucked, man. So first of all, there are no ruins in the ruins. Straight up. It's about a bunch of fucking idiots who travel to Mexico and are having a good time and they want to go and see these ruins. So they get lost and go off the beaten path and go up to this hill, and a bunch of people who live there try to stop them. And they're fucking idiots. And due to circumstances that would never happen in real life, they get stuck on this hill where a bunch of toxic vines are trying to kill them. They do literally every single possible thing wrong, which is what you want in a good survival horror. But in order for me to be on the side of the characters, I have to see their reasoning and see that they're doing the best that they could with what they have. Only one character actually has a brain. The female characters are basically the virgin and the slut. It's really bad. They're just it's just boring because I'm not rooting for them because they deserve to die. I was trying to read this to see if it would be a good comp for my tropical gothic horror novel, and it is not because it's shit. It just feels I the writing is so terrible. You can't write a single fucking character other than the one standard white male hero. Don't fucking write a book. I'm sorry. That's how it is. Just stop writing. Just don't. Just don't bother. This was about a veteran who goes into a house and something happened. I don't really remember this book, and I remember it getting really good reviews on Goodreads and not knowing what I missed. I missed something when it came to this book. It didn't seem like anything happened, and I don't remember anything about it. So, cheers. Okay, this was the anthology of Junji Ito that I was talking about. It has chapters from a bunch of different manga of his. if you haven't read him and are looking for kind of like a snapshot to see if you like him, this is a good start. It's not for me personally, but I'm glad that I tried it. I don't remember what this book is. It's also not a horror, so I read this in one sitting when I had the flu. Just all day, just sat on the couch and read this book. Um, it was fine, I think, but I don't actually remember anything about it, and I don't care. It's a cute cover though. Okay, this was that this was trash. This was bad. It's about a group of friends who go to this old sanatorium and rent it out for the holidays, and something bad happens. It's one of those kind of thrillers. Like, if you've ever read a Riley Sager book, this is essentially one of those, but worse. I found the main character was just so passive that she didn't do anything. And you really kind of need characters to have agency, especially in a thriller. They need to be doing stuff, figuring stuff out, uncovering twists and turns. Things need to be happening to move the plot along. But it felt pretty stagnant to me. So, despite the beautiful setting, pass. I don't remember what this was about, but I remember not liking it. I just look at the cover and get ugh, feelings. That's all I can tell you. Okay, this was another short graphic novel by Neil Gaiman. This was more obviously Snow White themed from the perspective of the evil queen, kind of reversing their roles a little bit. This is beautiful and it's good. Bookkeeper's Skull was the final of the 3 Warhammer novels that I read. It's a horror about essentially like warlord prince who goes to this work camp to ensure that all of the workers are going to deliver for the harvest, and people start getting murdered and turned into evil scarecrows. Or like the people are murdered and then an evil scarecrow pops up in the field wearing their clothes, which is great. Love that terrifying scarecrow trope. I think that's the only good thing about this book, frankly. This book takes way too long to get started, and spoilers, but they spend the entire time looking for the monster, and the monster happens to be the bookkeeper's skull, which is essentially like the world's most terrifying Amazon Alexa. It was like, oh no, the skull that flies around on its own and has creepy glowing red eyes, that's the thing that's killing everybody? Oh wow, I'm shocked. Like, don't name it the bookkeeper's skull if it's supposed to be a mystery that the bookkeeper's skull had anything to do with it. This was not good. No. I only put this one cover in here, but I did read the full Magician's trilogy this year. I intend to do a whole video on it. I do think that the books get progressively worse. The first one is hands down the best. And then second one's less good. The third one's an ending. If you don't know what the Magicians are about, there was a TV show, like, oh god, 7, 8 years ago now. Maybe closer to 10. I'm so fucking old. The main character doesn't know what he's gonna do after college. He's brilliant and deeply depressed and unsatisfied with life, and he gets accepted into Brakebills, which is essentially Hogwarts University. He learns how to do magic, and by learning how to do magic, is able to connect with his childhood obsession, Fillory, which is essentially, he was obsessed with Narnia as a kid, and gets to connect with that through magic. I don't think that spoils anything. I remember when I was reading this, my partner was like, oh, you're reading that? I fucking hated that book. And I think a lot of people have a hard time connecting, or not connecting, but like they have a hard time tolerating the main character, Quentin. And a lot of the characters are kind of pretentious assholes. And they are pretentious assholes in a way that I find very relatable as someone who is definitely a pretentious asshole at that age. It's just the truth. As a pretentious asshole who had depression in university, I found this really made me feel heard in a way that I don't think other books have made me feel heard in, and that's why I read the last two books, even though they were great. They were fine. I am perpetually disappointed by Riley Sager. I always really like the blurb on the back, and I think it's going to be for me, and then the execution just falls apart somehow. The beginning, they're pretty good at beginnings. He's pretty good at beginnings, and then it just falls off a cliff, so to speak. As I mentioned during the whistling, I was reading this at the same time as I was reading another Gothic book, and that has definitely colored my impressions of it. The setting is incredible. It's about a woman who goes to work as a nurse for this essentially Lizzie Borden woman, and they both have a kind of similar story of disgrace. And the nurse, has to unravel this kind of tangled web of what actually happened, and did Lizzie Borden kill her family? Again, not named Lizzie Borden, but essentially Lizzie Borden. I just found that the main character kept immediately jumping to conclusions, accusing people with very little evidence, being proved wrong, and then doing it all over again. The cops weren't really like an actual character. She kept running to the cops, and it was just like a cardboard cutout with cops written on it in Sharpie. And I would have liked it much better if she had like collected more evidence and like been an actual detective, I guess, been a good detective. She was a bad detective, which is bad when that's her role in the novel. So, Riley Sager, disappointing me yet again. This is fucking great. I think this, yeah, no, this is my favorite novel of 2023. It's about a Russian scientist named Valerie who is in a work camp, because that's just what happens to you in communist Russia at that time. He gets pulled from the work camp to go to this super secret lab where they're studying the effects of nuclear radiation. I absolutely learned more about nuclear radiation in this book than I ever did in any science class I've ever had. Just go read it. Just fucking go read it. Just go. Just don't come back here until you've read it. It's wonderful. Okay, so I read both this and Prince Caspian after reading all of the Magician's books, just because Fillory and Narnia, I just wanted to kind of refresh my brain about that. It was definitely a different experience reading these as an adult compared to when I was reading them as a kid. There's a lot of stuff that I picked up on that I might not have. Like some of the sexism of like, oh, obviously you girls can't possibly fight. You'll just be nurses. It's fine. Like, fuck off. Whatever. It was written 70 years ago, so not gonna rate it too harshly based on that, but I think it was just an interesting experience revisiting these. I was really excited for this book. It's about a writer who gets accepted into this writing retreat run by her favorite author, where essentially they're taken up to this beautiful snowy mountain cabin and asked to write an entire novel in 6 weeks. It's very intense. All you do is sit and write. You read your pages every day. You have to keep churning things out or you're going to get kicked out. The author is very eccentric and intense, and I really liked that premise. I didn't like where the plot eventually went. The twist in kind of like the 60% mark was not good. And a lot of it was just about the writer whose arch nemesis was there, and they had like this falling out of friendship, and it was just a little bit pedantic. It was just two people who need to get over their bullshit, frankly. And this woman feeling guilty for doing absolutely nothing wrong. Like, she felt guilty for like stepping towards a woman. Okay, so what happened was she and the other girl were arguing, and she took a step forwards towards the other woman, and that woman took a step back and ended up accidentally falling and like breaking her wrist. Which A, seems like an accident because it wasn't like she was lunging forward to like strangle her or anything. And B, she only broke her wrist. Which, like, in real life is an injury that would be frustrating to have to heal, but like it would be better if she broke her fucking neck. From a narrative perspective, it would have been more fun for me if she'd broken her neck and she had to live with the guilt. But I have a hard time with characters who feel guilt about doing nothing. It's boring. Move on. So yeah, I didn't end up liking this, and I really wanted to as a writer. And it's kind of a bummer. So another book I fucking hated. Here we go. I feel like I read a lot of books that I didn't like this year, but I think I probably read like an equal amount of like meh and good books as books that I hated. It's just that these ones stick in my brain and I have more to say about them, so it seems like I'm a fucking hater. I'm not trying to hate these things. But this was just bad. So it's based on a true story of two maids who were sisters who murdered their employers. It's like 1920s Paris. These women treated them horribly, and it's, as someone who firmly believes that we should eat the rich, I was all on board for this. But the problem with this graphic novel is that it didn't actually dive into anything about it. It was just like, oh, we had a bad Catholic upbringing and these people were like a little bit demanding, and then we murdered them. And then the eldest girl got hanged, and then the other woman in real life just went on to work as a maid in a hotel. It didn't really answer any of the questions that I had about it, and like didn't really make it like it's a fucking good story and someone should be writing about this. But it almost felt like it was trying to find a way to excuse them rather than have them revel. Like there's an element of like wanting these women to be empowered and to be able to free themselves from their abusers and like live the life that they deserve in a, like very in an anti-classist sort of way, and they didn't really do or deliver on that, or deliver on like, okay, so one of them paid for her crimes, the other one kept working as a maid. And I think it would be interesting to have like a character slowly discovering the past of this maid that they have in their house who happens to have murdered her ex-employers, and like how do you deal with that, and like do you immediately fire them, are you scared for your life, do you try to find out what happened and like why they did that, do you come to an understanding? Like that would have been a better framework for this, and this just didn't. It's just boring. It's just boring. Okay, so fun fact about me, I used to work in advertising. Okay, so the blurb on this is, can the politics of magic and the magic of advertising defeat the great dark one's bid for ultimate power? This is fucking stupid. This is pulp fantasy at its finest. So an advertising copywriter gets sucked into a fantasy world and finds out that creating catchy jingles is a form of magic. And then if he can make a catchy jingle about something, he can make it happen in the real life, which is bonkers. Was the execution on this good? Not really. Was it a fun little concept? Absolutely. I'm happy to have read it. Would I recommend it? Not necessarily, but I'm glad that this book exists. You know, I feel like writers should be able to write whatever stupid schlock that they feel compelled to, and I'm glad that someone felt compelled to do this. It makes me happy that this exists. Also, not a horror, so I have to keep drinking. I'm glad I didn't decide on doing a shot every time. Fuck. Okay, so I read the graphic novel version of this, mostly because I felt like I should know what it's about, but I don't like Margaret Atwood. I was scarred from having to read her in high school and being forced to read her books that I didn't enjoy. And this felt, I don't know, it's not my thing. I'm glad that I know what it's about now, but I don't like Atwood. So, this was a cute little indie novella short story, about a woman who goes to live in her house after her aunt passes away and leaves the house to her. She's not allowed to leave the house and has people come and bring her things, but is fine abiding by these rules, except for the fact that this portrait of her aunt seems to have some mysterious qualities, and we see that kind of secret unravel. This was fine. Okay, I read this by another booktuber recommendation, and usually, like, I would say this has an element of like romantic horror. It spends a lot of time dissecting the relationship between this woman and her wife, which is not usually my thing. But I felt like the mystery of it all was very compelling. So this is from the perspective of a woman whose wife goes on this submarine deep dive. The submarine is lost. They don't have communication, and then one day the wife just pops back up and is not the same as she used to be. And it's a fun little, I like the way that the mystery slowly unravels. It feels very satisfying, even though this book is contemplative, which is not usually my vibe. I'm an action, explosions, scary things under my bed kind of girl, and this isn't that book, but it's very well written and I really enjoyed it. I don't remember this book at all. Moving on. Okay, so not technically horror, but last but certainly least, let's go. Okay, this wasn't my most hated of the year. It's about a group of people who are at a table in the library, and there's a scream in the library, and someone gets murdered. And they kind of intertwine themselves into this friendship of being writers, and, or like one of them is a writer. They intertwine themselves of like this friendship of like, we were all here at the same time and this thing happened and I wonder what happened. Which is like a fun kind of premise, and it just gets kind of tedious and boring after that. A couple of the characters start getting together and the dynamic of that is just not interesting. It just wasn't a very interesting mystery. I was very disappointed with this. So those are all of the books that I've read in 2023. I mean, it's the 19th, so I'll probably get a couple more in by the end, but that is essentially everything that I read. Thank you so much for staying along in this journey. I would love to hear if you've read any of these, if you want to read any of these. Of course, there's a couple that I strongly recommend. That's what I read. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time. Cheers.